Good morning, children. This is your Shanghita ma'am, and I welcome all of you in my English literature class. Today, we will read the poem The Shade. It is written by Frank Flynn. So, Frank Flynn was a Northern Territory based Australian doctor, author, and a missionary priest. He is notable for his contributions to religion, medicine, as well as in literature. Now, students, do you know what is a shade? Have you heard of cowshed? A cowshed is a place where cows are kept. A tool shed is a place where tools are kept. A woodshed is a place for keeping all the woods. So all these are small rooms away from the main house. So a shed is a simple roofed structure used for garden storage or shelter animals or can be kept as a workshop. Sometimes tools and vehicles are also kept in a shed. So there are 4 stanzas in this poem. Let me read the first stanza for you. There is a shade at the bottom of our garden with a spider's web hanging across the door. The hinges are rusty and creak in the wind. When I am in bed, I lie and I listen. I'll open that door one day. So, at the bottom of the garden, there is a shade. Hardly anybody goes inside that shade. Therefore, the hinges or the door joints have become rusty. What are hinges? So, what are hinges? Hinges are the movable joint at the door or of a window. So, the hinges are very rusty. Okay. So, the hinges of the door of this shade are very rusty and they make a lot of noise whenever the wind makes them move. So, at night, the boy can hear the creaking sound of the door, and that creaking sound of the door scared the child. So here in this stanza, students, we have learnt some of the new meanings like rusty means affected by rust, creak means to make a sharp sound, hinges are the movable joint. These are the new words that we have learnt in this stanza. So when the poet is peacefully lying in his bed, he sometimes hears the noises from the shed. The poet wishes to be able to open the door of that shed someday. So he wants to overcome his fear someday and he really wants to open the door of that shed one day. Now let us move towards the next stanza. There is a dusty old window around at the side with 3 cracked panes of glass. I often think there is someone staring at me each time that I pass. I'll peep through that window one day. So the shed has a dusty old window on its side and 3 glass panes of the window are broken in that shed. So he plans to peep through the window one day. Whenever the poet passes through the shed, he gets the feeling as if someone was staring at him, someone was looking at him. So the poet wants to find out what was there inside that shed. So to find out, the poet wishes to peep inside that shed one day. So the boy is really interested to peep through the window so that he could see what was there inside that shed. So here we have learnt another two new words. Staring means to look fixedly. Peek means to cast a brief look or to peep. And dusty is covered with dust. Now let me read the third stanza. My brother says there is a ghost in the shade who hides under the rotten floorboards, and if I ever dare to set foot inside, he will jump out and chop off my head. But I will take a peek one day. So the poet's brother talks about the presence of a ghost inside that shade, and he warns the poet that if he went inside the shade, the ghost would chop off his head. Chop off means cut off. The ghost would cut off his head if he enters inside that shade. However, this doesn't much frighten the poet. He still wished to one day step inside that shade and see for himself what was inside there. So he was very curious to know. So now let me read the last stanza for you. I know that there isn't really a ghost. My brother tells lies to keep the shade for his den. There isn't anyone staring or making strange noises. And the spider has been gone from his web since I don't know when. I'll go into that shade one day soon, but not just yet. Here, the poet is able to overcome his fears. He is able to understand that there is no ghost inside that shade. He understands that there is actually nobody inside that shade who stares at him or makes those strange noises. The spider too is no longer there. His brother had been telling him lies because he wanted to retain the shade for his own self, for his own benefit. Therefore, very soon the poet would be able to set his foot inside the shade. He would be able to go inside the shade very soon. However, he says at the end that this can't happen immediately. So he decides to go inside that shade someday, but not just yet. So we have also learned here that cracked means broken. Web refers to the spider's web. Pens, these are the sheet of glass. Rotten means in a state of decay. So the motif of the poem seems to make the learners know about the shade and its significance. The rhythm and the richness of the language is very impressive. The poet talks about a shade in his garden. So there was a shade near the house of the poet. It scared him to say that he was really afraid of it whenever he passes by it. The door was covered with hanging spiders' webs. The door hinges were rusty because it was weather-beaten. It created a creaky sound while closing or opening of the door. The poet listened to the sound while lying in his bed. Yet the poet decided to open a door to witness everything by himself. He further described that windows were dusty and window panes were cracked. The poet realized that someone stared at him whenever he passes through the shade. He decided to open the gate of that shade one day. So the poet's brother tried to scare him away by telling him that a ghost hides under the rotten floorboards of that shade. He would jump off on the head of the poet and can cut off his head. Yet the poet did not let his confidence loose. The poet knew that the ghost did not exist in the shade. Rather, his elder brother used the shade as his den. The child realized the truth, so he could not be fooled by his brother anymore. He dared to visit the shade one day. He still awaited to realize for the right time to come. Now, students, let me tell you the central idea of the poem. The poem is about rationality and fearlessness. The poem teaches us that we should not believe in baseless and imaginative stories about ghosts and other supernatural creatures, as these stories are mostly used by people for their own benefit. Children and young adults, therefore, should not believe in irrational beings like ghosts and various other superstitions associated with them. The poet successfully establishes these ideas through the characters of the narrator and his brother. The narrator's brother fabricates a story about a ghost inhabiting the shade in order to prevent the narrator from entering inside the shade and to keep the shade all to himself. The narrator starts believing his story, and he imagines someone staring at him every time he passes by that shade. However, the narrator doesn't believe his manipulative story for very long and decides to enter into that shade one day. So, the central idea of the poem is fearlessness. This poem teaches us that we should not believe in any baseless or imaginative stories about ghosts or other supernatural entities. We should keep faith in ourselves and try to have a positive and a rational outlook on things around us. We must be courageous enough to face the situations of our life boldly. We must not escape from those adversities. Instead, we should accept them bravely and try to win over the tough situations of our life. So I think students, you have understood the poem. Thank you, students.